there is a lasting legacy to the demise of the Grenada Revolution, which is having an impact in all sorts of ways in the country right now, in terms of crime, in terms of drugs, in terms of AIDS, in terms of a lack of interest in education, and particularly popular education at adult level. All of those things that the government, the People's Revolutionary Government, demonstrated. It had the will, the capacity, and the determination to do something about. 20 years later, there were lots of people still hurting. People were still crying when they were doing interviews with me 20 years later. So there's a lot of healing to be done. And the country, the people of the country have got to be taken past the revenge stage.
I think that as in any instance of justice being meted out and sentences being handed down, that one should be able to draw a finite line for an end term on that. What I am surprised with is that all of these people are still in jail, because I would have thought that if they were given life sentences, that the life sentence would have run its course by now. I had expected that the Governor-General on the island would exercise some of his authority to ensure that these people now were released from prison. But in small communities, small islands like that, memories are very, very long. No Governor-General will release them so long as he feels that the people of the island want them to be incarcerated, whatever outsiders do and feel about it.
The people of Grenada need to see those 17 detainees doing much more than they have done so far to account for their own role in all of that stuff, to give people an understanding of what happened to the bodies of their loved ones, and to state their case in terms of their belief that it is unfair and not legally accurate or morally acceptable for them as specific individuals to be held to account for all of this.
If I spoke, as I have done, to the victims, people who lost loved ones in 1983, people who were injured in 1983, the thing I would say to them is, I don't really feel the best way for you to be helped is for an injustice to continue, for the anger to be directed at people who may or may not be the appropriate people for that anger, because there's been an unfair trial and therefore can't be relied on to identify those people as the appropriate place for that anger. And I think most people in Grenada would admit the status quo is actually quite an unpleasant place. The island, the country, is not dealing with the trauma it suffered in 1983. And what we all want is to see that people are happy and thriving and have all their rights protected. And I fear that while this is unaddressed, people can't truly be happy in the country because there is this thorn in the side, and that thorn must be removed.
People, I think, have to now take the view that it is important to heal all the wounds. And I think that the feelings of hatred and so on that existed right after the death of Maurice have to a large extent begun to fade away with the passage of time.
The Committee for Human Rights in Grenada changed its strategy. While still supporting the legal appeal, they began to focus on changing opinion on the island. They recognised that reducing popular opposition to release would be essential. An unlikely ally is Grenadian voice editor Leslie Pierre, a former detainee of the revolutionaries. Pierre began publishing a series of articles, many written by the CHRG campaigners supporting the case for the prisoners' release. After many years, Amnesty International were persuaded to take up the case of the 17. To mark the 20th anniversary of the US intervention, Amnesty published a report detailing the human rights and international law violations behind their imprisonment.
When we were over in Grenada, the invasion was being called a mercy mission, but people, when you really started talking to people, there wasn't that level of enthusiasm. There other than the fact that they thought the Americans would bring an awful lot of jobs with them and that the prosperity would filter down. And I think Venture reached the conclusion that the only solution was to actually try and concentrate more on the island, because I couldn't see how they were going to get released unless the view on the island changed. I know it's encouraged some of the people to challenge things on the radio now that they didn't used to have the confidence to do that. And I think what's interesting is that when they had to that successful High Court action recently that the Grenada government has now appealed against, there was a straw poll conducted about whether or not people thought they should be released, and not a single person that was interviewed was against them being released. The arguments were purely about whether or not they were guilty in the first place. Some felt they were and should never be released, some felt they should never have been locked up.
In any case, this length of term of imprisonment that has been suffered already surely is sufficient, even if people believe that they were guilty. And on humanitarian grounds, it must be time for the prisoners to be released.